forecasting is life or death in retail and CPG in a way that it's not in some other types of businesses. Literally from the very early days, many of these businesses are sitting there being like, I just threw half of my 401k and it's sitting in inventory in my garage, right? And like, that's how businesses both get really big and get really small really fast. That middle layer is collapsing, it's gone, right? The UI layer is completely gone. The assertion that pricing models will change dramatically is very true. The amount of time in sales calls that we're talking about data and data quality and data ingestion and what's below the waterline has increased dramatically. In general, like everyone's very worried about, will Anthropic build what I'm building? And that's a valid fear. I think you need 2 good FP&A people to run a consumer brand up to $100 million now. Like you need a senior person who can probably oversee finance and accounting, and then you could have one really good FP&A person and you just eliminate the bottom half of the triangle.
Welcome to Terminal Value, the podcast that explores markets through the eyes of the founders, operators, and investors shaping them. I'm your host, Nik Singh. Today, we're covering the financial planning and analysis, or FP&A, software market. My guest is Austin Gardner-Smith, founder and CEO of Drivepoint, a company building agentic planning software for consumer and retail verticals. Drivepoint has already raised over $9 million. This is a conversation about more than FP&A software. It is about what happens when software moves from helping teams organize work to increasingly doing the work itself. Consumer and retail are a useful lens for that shift because when forecasting breaks, the consequences show up fast in inventory, cash flow, and margins. We get into what FP&A actually does, why vertical software matters, how AI changes planning and forecasting, and what all of that could mean for the future shape of financial employment. Now, on to the interview. Austin, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to jump into a Drivepoint and get your point of view on the market. But before we do that, if you could level set with the audience and really just walk them through, where does FP&A sit within the office of the CFO? How does their role differ from others? And really, what's the day-to-day for those guys?
I think about finance kind of in 2 buckets, right? There's everything that happened in the past. There's the historical finance or financial operations and really setting the foundation for all of the work that will come to follow. And that's really about great data, good systems, strong processes, really good data organization. And that provides a super strong foundation. And then there's the financial modeling and forward-looking forecasting, scenario planning, business decision-making that I put in the category of strategic finance or FP&A. You can't have one without the other. An important marriage of those 2 things is really important. But I think FP&A ultimately is more of a value driver for the business. It's helping to uncover profitability and growth opportunities and actually create enterprise value for the business. And this stuff is absolutely fundamental, but is a need to have part of the business, which you can do exceptionally well and actually not create a ton of value for the business. And so that's how I think about the distinction. Traditionally, FP&A has been, you sort of have a CFO up here, you'd have a controller on this side, you'd have head of FP&A or head of finance on this side. You'd start building out your sort of like classic pyramid org structure that way, with FP&A traditionally being responsible for the forward-looking budget, the planning, variance analysis on a month-to-month to help us understand puts and takes on the business. And then there's this sort of like funny term that emerged in the late 90s, which I hate, called business partnering, which is like, oh, you're also there to be a business partner to these other parts of the organization, which to me is just like, you're there to like be the numbers guy in the room, which I think is just a dramatic disservice to FP&A in general and sort of like just that whole area. So if there's one piece of FP&A that I could rebrand, it would be that business partnering definition. Like, I think about it as like, your job is to drive enterprise value, like find opportunities to drive enterprise value. You're definitely gonna have to work with all parts of the business in order to do that. But like the fundamental mission of FP&A in my mind is to create enterprise value for the business. Like that is the job, full stop. And all the tools in the toolkit are in service of that mission.
Could you walk us through what are the pre-existing tool sets prior to Drivepoint that are used in the market from small companies to more mature companies that have a really robust financial department?
Yeah, so you had kind of an evolution of these toolkits over time. Like the generation 1 of these things were sort of Oracle products for the most part, Essbase and other products that started to get at enterprise performance management. A lot of them started out of sort of ERP land and were like, oh, we're doing procurement and things like this. Let's start sort of pushing into planning broadly. And so there's a whole Gen 1 of those products. Really probably Great Plains, which became part of Microsoft Dynamics forecasting, was one of the original pioneers. And the founder of Great Plains is now an investor and has done a lot of great work. But he was really one of the pioneers, I think, in getting FP&A and planning as a discipline into the sort of version 1 of this. Then you have version 2, I think, which is companies like Anaplan, Adaptive Insights, which was acquired by Workday, another of other sort of like larger horizontal platforms. They basically took sort of like Gen 1 of Dynamics and put it in the cloud. And that's sort of like that history of companies. Very good case studies there of like how big an FP&A software company in theory could get. Both of those companies, Anaplan was public for a hot second. Adaptive got acquired by Workday. We've seen OneStream more recently went public and then just recently came back private. And so those are sort of like the larger kind of players. Planful and Pigment are sort of like, in that neighborhood as well. But I think a lot of the story to me of the sort of Gen 2 products is they were almost all horizontal. And they were almost all enterprisey software products, like still very good sort of flavors of cloud-based software in some cases, but still basically UI on top of database sort of businesses, right? That were run with traditional sales teams. And the history of those businesses is that they are very sticky. They have very strong gross revenue retention. They have strong net revenue retention over time, but they took a long time to scale. They're hard to implement. It's basically selling on a cost savings or an efficiency basis of saying, hey, you're doing all of these tasks manually. You'll install this tool. Your team will do better. You'll do other things. And so I think that's been the history of sort of Gen 1, Gen 2 so far.
Bringing it to Drivepoint now, could you walk us through what is that end-to-end workflow and how does that Gen 3 type of model really display itself across that end journey?
There's a couple of ways to think about what Drivepoint does. Probably the best one at this point is to think about like what a really, really good hybrid of a FP&A person, a data engineer, and sort of like an analyst would do, right? And so a great person would go into your systems on a daily basis and make sure that all that data is coming in and is consistent. And then they would spend probably a good amount of time kind of massaging that data. Usually this is still being done by folks a lot today in Excel sheets. Like every FP&A manager can tell you in great detail about their mapping sheet that connects their financial data to their COGS data, to their retail data, right? So they pull that data together to form a good foundation of understanding. They would probably build some models. They'd maybe build a cash flow model, a 3-statement model, an inventory model, things like that to help understand and forecast what the business might look like. If they were really good, they would start running scenarios on those models to help understand, okay, not just a base case forecast, but an upside, a base case, and a downside. And as they get more sophisticated, they're also starting to be the producers of weekly reporting. So the rest of the team knows where we stand. It's keeping us honest on budget versus actual. It's giving us flash updates. And even better, the best ones are proactively identifying opportunities for improvement, running those scenarios to quantify how much each initiative could potentially generate in terms of enterprise value, and then bringing those to the management team to make decisions. And so Drivepoint is attempting to do all of that basically in a platform, an agent kind of solution. We're directly connected to Shopify, Amazon, TikTok Shop, the retailer data sources, Walmart, Target, Costco, Kroger, Unified KeHE, as well as the ERP and GL systems. So QuickBooks, NetSuite, all of the WMS and IMS systems, all of the inventory management tools and 3PLs. So we have full sort of insight into the revenue picture, the cost and expense picture, and then importantly, the product and the COGS picture. And then from there, inside the platform, customers are able to build their models. We build models on top of Excel. We have an Excel add-in that has an agent in it, much like Claude Code, Claude for Excel. We're using all of the LLM providers, as well as providing a bunch of tools on top of that, so that it can do everything that you want it to do, whether you're operating inside that Excel model or if you never even want to operate inside the Excel model and just have all that work happen in the background. And then we have a suite of reports, which are sort of like custom built for a CPG brand to be like, here's 100 things you need to be looking at. And here are the things that your marketing team wants. And here are the things that your supply planning team wants and all those things. So really trying to embed as much of that context as possible into the system, both from a data perspective. So all of your business data in there natively, plus all of the context of like, okay, well, what is the job here? Like, how do you be a really good FP&A person in CPG? And what are the outputs that investors want to see? And what are the forecasts I should be thinking about? And increasingly for us, like, getting to that proactive layer where we're proactively providing insights and opportunities and sort of like pushing those to you and saying basically like, hey, we ran 100 scenarios last night. Like, here are the 3 that I think you should look at and potentially take action on. And so it's been, a really interesting couple of months where that vision is flying at us way faster than we would have anticipated 12 or 18 months ago. So it's been a super fun time to be building.
You guys are very focused on the CPG, the retail space. And so
Yep.
Why did you kind of see the need to focus really specifically on a vertical or set of verticals? Like, what was the onus for that?
Yeah, I think there's two sort of embedded questions there. One is why focus on any vertical, and then why
Hmm.
focus on CPG or retail. Why focus on any vertical, I think, is related to some of the Gen 2 stuff that I was just talking about and the ability to want to create value for businesses. As you think about what actually creates value for the business, back to that mission of sort of like what should FP&A do really well, it should be uncovering answers and pathways and have those analyses complete, right? Like what the customer wants is to buy a product that is producing the answer to how do I improve my enterprise value. And I think when you have a horizontal tool, you're basically saying like, hey, here's a faster car to get you to the same place, but you still have to drive it manually. You have to figure out where you're going. You have to do all the work. And what getting verticalized does is help you start to be like, well, actually in consumer and retail, like there's only 150 ways to increase enterprise value, right? Like we know what those playbooks are. And I think we can help to embed them inside the tooling so that you can get to actual value much faster, as opposed to saying like, here's a toolkit, you have to build the swing set, right? I want to give you the perfect, not to mix my analogies there, but like, to give you the perfect setup basically. And that's a combination of templates, it's a combination of workflows, and it's a combination of data sources. And of those, data sources probably being maybe the most important in terms of having really, really good depth of connection to the data sources that our industry or the vertical industry cares about, and importantly, embedding the domain expertise into the context layer, into the data modeling layer that sits between the raw data and the great outputs that you want. And so for us, I had some experience with consumer brands from a prior company. We were building ad tech software basically for like wave one of the D2C cool kids, Allbirds and Harry Parkers and Warby Parker and Harry's and Bonobos. And so that was sort of like, oh, there's really interesting problems in consumer. One, there's tons of data available. We have tons of transaction data, which enables AI and predictive modeling to work really well. Two, they're low margin businesses, generally speaking. Like a great margin in consumer is like 20% EBITDA, right?
Yeah.
Every point of EBITDA really matters in terms of enterprise value. So that matters a ton. And it's an inventory business, and probably the most heavily inventoried business or domain. In other words, like whether you forecast really, really badly or whether you forecast really, really well, like you have to forecast because you have to place dollar bets by buying inventory on what the future is going to look like. So every founder in retail and consumer goods, from the minute they open the business, is by definition forecasting what they think is going to happen. And the ability to forecast in consumer creates life or death scenarios, right?
Yeah, it's a lot different than us as SaaS guys, where it's like you
Right.
get the forecast wrong, and it's like, all right, I should have hired or not hired these sales guys, but it's not. Right. Oh man, I'm sitting on this huge inventory.
Yeah, it's not like literally from the very early days, many of these businesses are sitting there being like, I just threw half of my 401k and it's sitting in inventory in my garage, right? And like that's how businesses both get really big and get really small really fast. And so forecasting is life or death in retail and CPG in a way that it's not in some other types of businesses. And so you have a combination of really high data needs, really specialized opportunities, tight margins, and sort of the life or death nature of it, as opposed to other sectors. And I think that was a really good formula for building a product that customers want.
I always felt it was really difficult to go engage with prior horizontal FP&A products because I either had to deep dive into an Excel spreadsheet or I had to find time for my FP&A leader to go talk. And if you're leading a product line, you got your own stuff to worry about. And so do you see AI as not only helping FP&A, but potentially also helping business line leaders, or where are you focusing it in your product?
Yeah, 100% being able to help FP&A, and I think being able to enable business. A lot of what we're seeing is a big driver, a big value driver for especially customers who are in that sort of like $50 million plus segment, is the multiplayer aspect of finance, and the fact that like with Drivepoint, you have a platform that you can create a space for your marketing team to run their own scenarios and empower people to do that work on their own, to have live access to the budgets and how they're pacing versus actual, and to have the entire team singing from a central, well-permissioned source of truth, right? And so I think, especially with the explosion of AI tools, like it's really awesome that we can democratize access to the financial model, basically, and to all of these planning tools, but it also comes with important thoughts around permissions and access management and things like that, and new ways of doing that, which I think is actually a lot of interesting space to where we're seeing value accrue in having a specialized platform for these things, right? Like we we have Claude inside the product, like it is what is powering the product. But I think it's governed access to these things in the correct way for the correct use case, which I think is important for companies as they're getting more and more people into the finance function. It's basically like, I wrote a LinkedIn post the other day. I was like, hey, Claude, like, tell me about my 6 coworkers' salaries and like where I stand relative to them. And like, maybe poke around in our cash position and see if I should be looking for a new job or not. And so like those are the types of things that I think we're going to see pop up over time. It's not the end of the world. Like we'll get through it, and you can certainly fat finger those sorts of things in any other tool. But, it's like, I think permissions are like about to be the sexiest feature of all time,
Well, yeah, that gets into my next question, which is how do you build that trust layer? Not only that, hey, it's not going to give salary information out to everyone else, but that the FP&A leaders actually trust the output coming out of this for their own decisions.
Yeah, there are 2 really important things there. I think about it as a 3-layer framework. This is sort of like basically just to give, like, there's a bottom layer of what I call fundamentals, right? Which is like really, really good fundamentals around access management and data protection. And then importantly, context and data quality. And so that's sort of like the foundational layer. And you used to build, this has always been the case for software, like you had to build it, but in previous generations of software, you had a UI layer where you could like fix a lot of those mistakes, right? Or like, basically like, oh, we're just not going to expose that field or whatever. And so you were restricting a lot of information at the UI layer. And then the user was really on their own to create what I call the deliverable layer, or like the actual outputs of the tool, right? And so I think what we're seeing happen is like that UI, that middle layer is like collapsing. It's gone, right? The UI layer is completely gone. And so I think the important thing is to provide really good governed data access and really good fundamentals around things like permissions, authentication, logging, like it's like connectivity to the other surfaces that you want, and then provide really, really good artifacts or outputs at the top layer that get you all the way to the end product, right? Because I think that's the value proposition that's really changed, is like that UI tooling layer, like giving me the human a better toolkit so that I can save, 20% of my hourly time, is no longer a good enough value proposition for SaaS. Like
that's so funny, because that was all, like, that was a lot of what we sold. We spent so much time demoing the product. Now, so if I'm understanding correctly, are you spending a lot of time in your sales cycle just talking about data quality as opposed to just walking them through the interface?
The amount of time in sales calls that we're talking about data and data quality and data ingestion and what's below the waterline has increased dramatically over the last 6 months. We have built a really, like, I think this is one of the things that we got lucky, like totally almost by accident, but like we built a really, really strong data layer. So we're basically provisioning a complete Google Cloud project for every customer with a full BigQuery data set, like full independent ETL platforms. We're building a complete modern data stack behind the scenes for every customer. No one ever wanted to buy that previously. They wanted to buy the UI, right? So no one was ever interested in this thing that we built, and like all of the data modeling, the secondary data modeling. So not your raw landed data, but like, okay, the raw landed data is like, can cut you in 100 different ways if you're not smart about how you put that stuff together. And so we have that, and like finally, like, oh, I found myself demoing the BigQuery stuff that we generate automatically and doing all that. It's like, no, within 5 minutes, I will generate a complete modern data stack for you. It's like, I had a customer yesterday that was like, oh, I typed into Claude, like, how do I get all this data together? And it's like, well, first you need to go build a data warehouse with dbt and Fivetran and all these things. It's like, okay, well, you have to go up this massive learning curve, even with Claude. And then you have to pay the bill. Like, people don't recognize how big that bill is if you're doing it on your own. You could easily be spending $4 or $5, $6 grand a month as a $100 million brand, building just the data infrastructure, just paying the bill, let alone getting to the outputs, right? And there are so many brands that have gone down the trap, and they hire a 3-person data team and they build it all themselves. And what they're building are the same, because it's all vertical. It's like in commerce, everyone builds the same 7 fact tables, it's like, and so they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get there. So anyways, that part of our offering, I think, is becoming a lot more valuable, and people are like, oh, wait, like it's here, like I can just plug into it. And you're like, yes, you can. You can plug your agents into it. You can plug our UI into it. You can plug your BI tools into it, whatever you want to do.
Where do you see as, obviously the public markets are having this big battle around where the future of software is, and within that battle is this pricing discussion, which is, hey, we traditionally price on a per user per month basis. That gave predictability to the markets. That story is clearly going away. And so I'd love your perspective, just as you see it on the FP&A side, is Where do you see pricing evolving in your category? Is it, do you have to move to utilization driven? Are you able to kind of control cost structures of how much you pound in the model so there's more predictability? What are you hearing from customers?
The assertion that pricing models will change dramatically for software businesses over the next couple of years is very true, and I buy into. The level one assumption that most public market investors I think are making of it's because seat-based models are going away is just oversimplified. It's not actually true. And I think when you hear customers talk, I was listening to a sales rep for another company yesterday that we were at talking about pricing. And everyone still understands seats and users and everyone. So all the advantages that it lacks or headcount going away, it still has in terms of customers understanding it. We don't price on seats and users, never have. And I don't think ever will, but I reserve the right to change my mind on that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, look at the fact that Claude and OpenAI and all the other tools, they're all seat-based.
Yeah.
It's so obvious. It's still a dumb, simple way to price, and everyone gets it. It's it's 20 users a month. Okay, great. So I think that the assumption that it's going to go away because suddenly all these jobs are going to go away is incorrect. I think the easier thing to do than fire everybody is to give everybody a subscription to an AI tool, right? And hope that you get 2x productivity out of the people that you have. And so I do think there will be job losses and changes as a part of all of this stuff, but I think that the idea that seat-based totally goes away is wrong. I think in general, you see it has to get more value-based. As it becomes not a tool that saves you 10 hours, but a thing that produces the output that you want, well, you start being willing to pay for more of the output. So I think it could go output-based. I think there'll be the metered billing piece seems to be right in terms of there's just a meter running as to how much intelligence you use and you price on that basis. So I think you'll start to see a lowering of core platform fees probably. You'll see more usage fees making up part of the revenue mix for most software companies. And then whether or not you get to full output based, I think is more of an academic question over time. It's no one knows how to price. Customers don't yet at least know how to think about that or be oh yeah, I want to pay you $6 per scenario. It's no one has the mental models to do that. So I think it's certainly possible, but I think that the humans, two models that people understand well that are working pretty well, I think, are seats and usage. And you'll just see the mix of those models change probably.
What do you see from the competitive landscape around AI players, horizontal players that could get more verticalized in your space? What's your take on where the industry's going?
Yeah, I think it's an open question. I think in general, everyone's very worried about, will Anthropic build what I'm building? And that's a valid fear. I think it's a flavor of the same story that sort of plays out over and over and over again in tech, I think. And we're at the peak of some of the hype cycle on it. So I think it's very real that this time will be somewhat different and the pace of change will be dramatically faster. But I think in general, you see some dominant players emerge early that become platforms and become the substrate for a ton of new. We certainly are seeing that with OpenAI and Claude. And I'm not really trying to compete against Claude, in my opinion. They're going to build amazing models. They're going to continue building great UI products and surfaces. But I think we're already seeing people start to use Claude and use these tools across a wide variety of clients, if you will, of interfaces. Claude has a great interface. Claude Code has an interface. Now you have Claude Bot, which is essentially a different interface on top of the same types of toolkits. We have OpenAI, we have all these different client surfaces. And so I think about us as basically building on top of those platforms and creating a really good, really specialized client surface and context layer to accomplish a specific job. And I think that'll go over time. I mean, one sort of counterpoint that I make about a lot of this stuff, or just think about it, is okay, how many chat apps do you have on your phone? They all are exactly the same product behind the scenes, basically, right? But we still choose to use Slack for one use case. We choose to use iMessage for another use case. So people will still select tools, I think, based on their use case and having nothing to do with the actual functionality. Telegram and Slack, basically identical things. Signal, almost identical things, but I'm using them in different use cases for non-technical reasons. They all essentially are 100% feature parity, right? And so I still think that there's tons of opportunity for differentiation for creative entrepreneurs and people who are building great products that do things really well and are tuned for a specific use case, both for certain agents, for certain use cases, for certain verticals. I just think we'll see an explosion of that, and the bar will get raised for how far down the path does that product take you. Again, it's not, we're not building tools anymore. We're building to the outputs.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll-
and
Go ahead.
it's even down to the point where like we're today using Riverside as opposed to Zoom or some other tool because it makes it incrementally easier for us to go then distribute this out. So I think
Yeah.
that point's well taken. As you think about the org design for FP&A, do you see that changing as tools like yours get out into the world?
In general, dramatically, yeah. I mean, I think you need two good FP&A people to run a consumer brand up to $100 million now. Like you need a senior person who can probably oversee finance and accounting, and then you could have one really good FP&A person, and you just eliminate the bottom half of the triangle. Basically, like I mean, you may end up with more managers because you find out that these people or FP&A analysts or directors are the most valuable people in the organization because each of them can generate 2 to 3 to 4 percentage points of of incremental EBITDA or gain with this toolkit, and so you may end up with more, but I do think that the mix shifts to slightly more senior folks, or like people who are senior is not the right way to think about it. It implies sort of like older with more experience, but I think it lends itself to more strategic thinkers who can sort of like execute these ideas across the business. But yeah, I think you have a dramatic shifting of the org. Like literally, I mean, the example that I used in our Series A pitch deck was P&G has something like 860 entry-level financial analysts. That's probably a couple $100 million of salary. It's a crazy amount of money that's basically being used to move data from point to point and do sort of like relatively routine analysis. And so I think the AI is already better than that. So I think like, we're going to see some shifting of this part of the org chart for sure.
I think to our earlier point, a lot of that efficiency will move towards revenue generation and creating different departments. But that's incredible efficiency that Drivepoint can go create.
Yeah, I think they're really smart people, and like the examples are all around us, and directors of FP&A that we talk to who are incredibly smart and like could be absolute value creation weapons if unconstrained and freed from the burdens of like 80% of their time. It's like, no, I have to like chase down this report from my broker and like cobble together this, I have to do 80% of the work before I can do any of the work, basically.
Yeah.
It's sort of the common refrain.
As you guys start to expand, where do you see Drivepoint going? Do you see yourself moving kind of up and down segments within CPG? Do you see yourself expanding into other verticals?
Yeah, I think the last thing we will do is leave the vertical. I think that's not out of the question, but sort of like areas for us to expand into. I think one is definitely upmarket. Like we've seen our brands that we've worked with grow up in 10x in size, and we're continuing to see more and more interest from bigger brands. So I think still need all the same tooling. It's like there's all of those Gen 2 players that we talked about, like not tons of penetration still even in the market. So super lots of headroom for us. And then I think we want to build around the office of the CFO for consumer and say like, okay, like we've got a great FP&A product. We've got a great analytics product. We're building a great demand planning product. We have a great inventory product. We go back to our original working capital ideas, build a great working capital product, build a great accounting automation product, and really start to kind of eat the world on some of these other functions. So that's sort of like I would like to build more suite for our vertical. I just strongly believe in the power of vertical solutions to generate more value than horizontal solutions. And maybe if we nail that, then we'll go tackle another use case or another vertical. But that's the plan at the moment.
Well, I love that focus, Austin. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. Enjoy the conversation.
That was a really interesting conversation with Austin. There are a couple of points that stood out, particularly around where the future value of software will reside in an AI world. One is clearly context. Austin makes the point that in the consumer and retail verticals, there's really a limited number of playbooks that can drive enterprise value. And so it becomes critical in that context to really understand what the setup is and model the software around that setup. That means the right integrations, the right data model, the right operating context built into the AI layer so that software can move from being a generic tool to actually doing the work accurately. The second point, which dovetails off the first, is that the UI layer becomes less and less valuable. As the AI starts to do more of the work, the winners aren't going to be the folks with the best UI or the best model. The winners are the folks who can set up the best contextual layer around the AI. That's the best integrations, the best workflow context, the best permissioning layer. Those will be the players that win in an agentic world. And lastly, organizations are likely to get more and more efficient as the software starts to move from organizing the work to actually doing the work. If that happens, the value of the product shifts. It's no longer just about saving an analyst's time. It's about shaping the organization to push for more efficiency. And where that likely moves the human is into a world where they're using more judgment and more strategy and less of the menial labor that prior SaaS required. This is why the category matters. It's not just a niche corner of financial software. It's an early indicator at where the value will reside in the next generation of software. Thanks again for watching Terminal Value, and I hope to see you next week.